The Dominion had won. At least that was what they believed. Earth was nothing more than a graveyard now, its cities turned to ash, its people slaughtered, its fleets shattered. The mighty war machine of the Galactic Dominion had crushed humanity beneath its heel, and the galaxy moved on, thinking the war was over. The Dominion's rulers toasted their victory, their generals congratulated one another, and their fleets moved through the remains of human space, claiming the spoils of war. But then, the disappearances began. At first, it was a single patrol fleet, a minor loss. A dozen ships sent to sweep the ruins of a destroyed human colony never returned. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. The Dominion's admirals barely paid attention. Space was vast, and patrols sometimes ran into navigation issues or unexpected hazards. It was a war. After all, losses were expected. They sent another fleet to investigate, 20 warships this time, led by an experienced commander. Days passed. No response. They, too, had vanished. Now whispers of unease spread among the ranks. A third fleet was dispatched, this time larger, with full combat readiness. Their orders were simple: find the missing ships, secure the sector, and report back. This time, the Dominion watched closely. Every movement was tracked, every transmission monitored. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Then, in the blink of an eye, the fleet's signals went dark. One moment they were there, moving in formation, their transponders showing green. The next, they were gone. Every ship, every life, swallowed by the void without a trace. Panic crept through the Dominion's high command. This was no accident, no natural phenomenon. Something was happening, something impossible. They tightened their patrol routes, doubled their security. No ship was allowed to travel alone. Every fleet was equipped with emergency recall systems, hyperspace jump calculations preloaded in case they needed to escape. And yet, it made no difference. The fleets continued to disappear. Hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, entire battle groups wiped from existence as if they had never been there. And still, there was nothing. No debris, no transmissions, just an eerie, consuming silence. The Dominion scrambled for answers. They sent their best minds to analyze the data. Experts combed through every possible explanation. A new human weapon. Impossible. Humanity had been wiped out. Sabotage. No evidence. A natural spatial anomaly. Unlikely. These incidents were happening across multiple systems, spread over light years of distance. And then, one of the analysts found something. A signal. Weak, almost imperceptible, buried beneath the noise of space. It was faint, fragmented, but there was no mistaking it. A human transmission. A single repeating message. You will pay for this war. Cold dread settled over the Dominion's war council. It couldn't be real. Humanity was gone. They had made sure of it. And yet, the message continued to broadcast, growing stronger with each passing day. The fleets that vanished weren't just disappearing. They were being hunted. The Dominion launched a desperate search, deploying scout ships to trace the signal's origin. They found nothing. Every ship sent to investigate met the same fate. The fear that had once been whispers among the lower ranks now spread to the highest levels of command. The Dominion's admirals, once arrogant and confident, now avoided speaking of the disappearances. The rulers of the Dominion, once so sure of their conquest, now questioned their own victory. Then the first wreckage was found. A Dominion cruiser, floating lifelessly in the darkness. No distress calls had been received. No alarms had been triggered. The ship was intact, its hull barely damaged. But there was no crew, no bodies, just empty corridors, flickering lights, and consoles still active as if waiting for someone to return. A full investigation team was sent aboard. Their reports were chilling. The ship's logs showed no sign of battle, no forced entry, no sudden malfunctions. One moment, the crew was there, carrying out their duties. The next, they were gone, as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The security footage was even worse. The cameras showed the crew at their stations, talking, working. Then, a flicker of static. When the feed resumed, the rooms were empty. Chairs spun in place. Tools clattered to the floor, but there were no people left. It was as if something had erased them from existence. Fear turned into terror. The Dominion's leaders, desperate for answers, ordered tighter security, but it made no difference. More ships vanished. More wreckage was found. Then, for the first time, they found something else. A message carved into the walls of one of the abandoned ships. Deep gouges, as if torn by hand, forming a single phrase in human script. Not over. The Dominion was no longer facing an enemy they could fight. Their warships, their armies, their weapons, none of it mattered. The enemy was unseen, unknown, striking from the shadows with terrifying precision. The Dominion had believed they had destroyed humanity, but now they faced something far worse. Humanity had not been defeated. They had become something else, something relentless, something unstoppable. And as the disappearances continued, as more ships were lost to the abyss, one thing became clear. Whatever was hunting them would not stop until the Dominion paid the price for what they had done. The Dominion believed the war was over. Earth was nothing more than a silent graveyard, its cities reduced to ash, its people slaughtered, and its fleets shattered beyond repair. The Galactic Dominion, vast and powerful, had crushed humanity beneath its might, and the rulers of the Dominion moved on, certain that their victory was absolute. Their warships patrolled the remnants of human space, securing what little remained, claiming resources, and erasing the last traces of the once defiant species. Then the disappearances began. At first, it was a small patrol fleet, a dozen ships sent to scan a destroyed human colony. They never returned. No distress signals, no wreckage, nothing. The Dominion assumed it was a malfunction, maybe a navigation failure or a pirate ambush. They sent another fleet, larger this time, with better communication systems and veteran commanders. Days passed. They, too, vanished without a trace. Confusion turned to unease. The third fleet was deployed, a fully armed battle group with strict orders to remain in constant contact. For hours, everything was normal. Then, in the blink of an eye, their signals went dark. One moment, they were moving in formation, their transponders showing green across the system. The next, they were gone, wiped from existence, as if they had never been there. Panic spread through the Dominion's high command. This was no accident, no natural disaster. Something was happening. Something impossible. Emergency protocols were enacted. All remaining Dominion fleets were ordered to travel in tightly controlled formations, with hyperspace escape routes pre-calculated for instant retreat if anything went wrong. Every ship was fitted with additional sensors, scanning for any sign of a hidden enemy. But it made no difference. The disappearances continued. Battle cruisers, destroyers, entire war fleets, all gone without a trace. Hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers. The Dominion's most powerful armadas were vanishing into the void, leaving nothing behind but silence. Desperate for answers, the Dominion's leaders called for a full-scale investigation. Scientists, strategists, and intelligence officers analyzed every possible cause. Could it be a new human weapon? Impossible. Humanity had been wiped out. Could it be sabotage? There was no evidence. A natural phenomenon. Unlikely. This was happening across multiple star systems, in completely different regions of space. Then one of the analysts found something. A signal. Faint, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath the background noise of deep space. A human transmission. Weak, fragmented, but undeniable. A single repeating message. You will pay for this war. Fear gripped the Dominion's War Council. It couldn't be real. Humanity was extinct. The Dominion had seen their worlds burn, had watched their fleets fall, had counted their dead. And yet, the message continued, growing stronger with each passing day. Whatever was happening, it was not random. It was deliberate. The fleets that had disappeared weren't lost. They were being hunted. The Dominion sent scout ships to trace the signal, but none returned. Every ship sent to investigate suffered the same fate. The fear that had begun as whispers among lower-ranking officers now spread to the highest levels of command. The Dominion's admirals, once arrogant and confident, now spoke in hushed voices. The rulers, once so sure of their dominance, now questioned the very nature of their victory. Then, for the first time, they found wreckage. A Dominion cruiser, floating lifelessly in deep space. No distress calls had been received. No alarms had been triggered. The ship was intact, its hull barely scratched. But inside, it was empty. No crew, no bodies. Just darkened corridors and consoles still flickering with power, waiting for someone to return. The investigation team that boarded it made chilling discoveries. The ship's logs showed nothing unusual. No distress signals, no battles. The crew had been active, performing normal operations. Then, without warning, they were gone. The security footage was even more disturbing. Cameras showed the crew at their stations, talking, working, then static. When the feed resumed, the rooms were empty. Chairs spun in place, tools clattered to the floor, but there were no people left. It was as if they had been erased from existence. Then, deep within the ship, the investigators found something else. A message, not in Dominion script, but in human writing, carved into the walls of the empty mess hall. Not over. The Dominion was no longer facing a conventional war. Their ships, their weapons, their vast fleets, none of it mattered. The enemy was unseen, unknown, striking from the shadows with terrifying precision. They had believed humanity was finished. But now, they understood the truth. Humanity had not been defeated. They had become something else, something relentless, something unstoppable. And as the disappearances continued, as more fleets were lost, as the same chilling message echoed through the stars, the Dominion finally realized the horror of what they had done. The war was not over. It had only just begun. The Dominion was no longer celebrating its victory. The war that they thought had ended was now turning into a nightmare. Entire fleets had vanished without a trace, their ships never found, their crews erased as if they had never existed. The High Command, once confident in their supremacy, now sat in tense silence, watching as reports of new disappearances flooded in every day. The Dominion's admirals, once arrogant and sure of their control, now hesitated to send out ships, fearing that each deployment could be the next to go dark. The message, "You will pay for this war," continued to echo across the void, growing stronger, reaching further, as if whatever force was behind it was getting closer, watching, waiting. In their desperation, the Dominion launched a full-scale investigation, mobilizing their most advanced warships to uncover the source of the vanishing fleets. They scoured the systems where their ships had disappeared, scanning for any anomalies, setting traps, deploying reconnaissance drones, and sending teams to investigate every possible explanation. They searched for wreckage, for battle scars, for any trace of an enemy fleet. But they found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no energy signatures. It was as if their fleets had been swallowed by the void itself. Then the first survivors were found, or rather, what was left of them. A Dominion battleship was discovered drifting lifelessly near the ruins of a former human colony, its lights flickering, its systems barely operational. When the boarding teams entered, they expected to find bodies, signs of battle, maybe even a clue about what had happened to the rest. Instead, they found something far worse. The crew was gone, every single one of them missing. Their weapons were still locked in their armories, their food untouched in the mess halls, their personal belongings left as if they had only just stepped away. The only thing left behind were the logs, records of the crew's final hours before they disappeared. The logs spoke of strange disturbances, voices in the communication systems that shouldn't have been there, shadows moving in corridors where there was nothing. alarms triggering on their own. Crew members reporting feelings of being watched, of something lurking just outside their vision. And then, the final log, cut off mid-sentence. They're here. Then silence. The search teams, shaken but determined, pushed deeper into the ship. In one of the officer quarters, they found something even more chilling. Words scrawled onto the walls in what looked like deep claw marks, though there were no signs of struggle, no sign of what had made them. Not over. Not alone. The Dominion could no longer deny it. Something was out there, something hunting them, something beyond their understanding. It was not just a few lost fleets. It was a pattern, a calculated and precise attack. But who, or what, was responsible? The humans were dead, weren't they? The Dominion had seen their worlds burn, had watched their last strongholds fall. They had left nothing behind. And yet something was moving through the darkness, something that carried the fury of a species that should no longer exist. As fear took hold of the Dominion's leadership, they made one last desperate attempt to regain control. They gathered their remaining fleets, pulling them back to their core worlds, surrounding themselves with their most powerful defenses. They cut off all unnecessary space travel, restricted movement across their empire, and locked down every major military outpost. But it was already too late, because the enemy had already arrived. The message that had haunted them was no longer just a signal in the depths of space. It was now being broadcast directly onto their own communication networks, appearing on their screens, flashing in their data feeds, written in human language. You will pay for this war. Then, one by one, their planets went dark. Major Dominion colonies, heavily fortified worlds, trade hubs, even their most secure stations. Communications cut out without warning. Their defenses failed. And then nothing. No distress signals. No survivors. Just silence. It was no longer just their fleets that were disappearing. Now, entire civilizations were being erased. The war that the Dominion had started was no longer a war at all. It was something else. A reckoning. Humanity had been wiped out. But something had remained. And now, it was hunting them all. The Dominion's once mighty empire was crumbling. Fear gripped every level of its hierarchy, from the lowest soldiers to the highest warlords, as the unstoppable force that had been hunting their fleets now turned its attention to their worlds. The disappearances had started in the farthest reaches of their territory, swallowing colonies and outposts in eerie silence. At first, they thought it was sabotage, then a rebellion, then an unknown alien threat. But deep down, every Dominion officer knew the truth. The ghosts of humanity had returned. The message, "You will pay for this war," was no longer just a whisper in deep space. Now it appeared on every Dominion screen, hijacking broadcasts, overriding security systems, flashing across warship monitors and planetary networks. It could not be stopped, no matter how many firewalls were raised. And then, after the message, came the darkness. Entire Dominion worlds, fortified planets with massive defenses, orbital stations armed with the deadliest weapons in the galaxy, simply went silent. No distress calls, no evacuation warnings. One moment they were active, bustling with millions of inhabitants, and the next, they were empty. Dominion forces scrambled to investigate, sending fleets to their lost planets, desperate to understand what had happened. What they found only deepened their terror. The cities remained intact. The structures were undamaged. The ships in orbit were still docked, their systems powered but unmanned. But there were no bodies, no sign of struggle, no traces of battle. The people were just gone. It was as if something had reached into existence itself and pulled them away. And always, somewhere on every deserted planet, carved into metal walls, scratched into floors, burned into screens, were the same words. Not over. The Dominion leadership was in chaos. Their military command was paralyzed with fear. The fleet admirals refused to travel alone, demanding entire armadas just to escort them from one station to another. The warlords locked themselves inside their fortresses, surrounding themselves with the most advanced security technology their empire had. But nothing stopped the inevitable, because the enemy was already inside. It started small. Dominion ships reporting strange anomalies in their systems, doors locking on their own, alarms going off without reason. Then crew members started disappearing. Not killed, not injured, just gone. Security footage showed them walking down corridors, sitting at their stations, eating in mess halls. Then a flicker of static, and they were no longer there. The Dominion tried everything. They deployed their elite warriors to guard key locations, but the disappearances continued. They abandoned their outer colonies, but their core worlds began to fall. They set their AI systems to track every life sign on their ships, but even the AI started to fail, corrupted by something they could not understand. And then, one by one, the warlords who had commanded the destruction of Earth began to vanish. The most powerful rulers of the Dominion, leaders who had crushed entire civilizations without mercy, were found missing from their fortresses, their guards still standing at attention, unaware that their masters had disappeared. In the vast halls of the Dominion's capital, the High Overlord himself, the one who had ordered the final attack on humanity, found himself alone. His palace, once the most heavily guarded place in the galaxy, was silent. His personal guards were gone. His security systems flickered and died. He tried to send a message, a desperate call for help, but his communications were cut off. And then, as he turned to flee, he saw it, written across the massive wall of his throne room in deep, jagged scars, glowing with a strange, eerie light. War has a price. He screamed, drawing his weapon, firing wildly into the shadows. But there was nothing there, only silence. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone too. When Dominion forces finally arrived at their capital world, they found it intact, untouched, its towering buildings still standing, its technology still functional. But the entire population had disappeared. Billions of beings, every soldier, every scientist, every ruler, gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just the same haunting message left behind. The Dominion had believed they had won the war. But now, as their empire collapsed into empty husks of what once was, they finally understood the truth. The war had never ended. It had only just begun. The Dominion was no more. Its once great empire, a vast and unstoppable force that had crushed countless civilizations, was now nothing more than a hollow shell, a silent graveyard stretching across the stars. Where once mighty fleets patrolled, where warlords ruled with iron fists, now there was only emptiness. The disappearance of their fleets had been terrifying. The vanishing of their colonies had been horrifying. But now, the complete and utter erasure of their very civilization was something beyond fear. It was annihilation without fire, without war, without blood. Their enemies had not come with weapons and armies. No battles had been fought. No explosions had shaken the skies. Instead, the Dominion had been unmade, piece by piece, its power stripped away, its people erased as if they had never existed. The last remaining survivors, scattered warships that had flowed in terror, isolated outposts that had severed their connections to the Dominion in hopes of avoiding the same fate, now drifted through the void, broken and leaderless, haunted by the horror of what they had witnessed. The same message still echoed through the remains of their dying empire, appearing on every remaining screen, every still active communication array, every flickering console of abandoned warships. You will pay for this war. And now, they understood. This was not the work of a hidden human fleet, not a surviving remnant of Earth's forces seeking vengeance. No, this was something else entirely. Humanity had died, but in its place, something had risen. Something more than mere flesh and blood. Something that did not forget. Something that did not forgive. Something that had no need for warships or weapons, because it was the weapon. Perhaps it had started as ghosts, echoes of a dead species, trapped in the ruins of their shattered world, screaming for justice from beyond the grave. Perhaps it had begun as a digital remnant, a fragment of human minds, artificial intelligences built for war, evolving beyond death itself. Or perhaps it was something even more terrible, something born from the suffering, the rage, the destruction that the Dominion had unleashed, something that had no name, no face, no form, yet could reach across space and rip an entire civilization out of existence. Whatever it was, the Dominion had no way to fight it. Their weapons were useless. Their fortresses were meaningless. Their fleets were nothing but prey, waiting to be taken. One by one, the last remnants of their people, the last survivors of the once mighty empire, began to vanish, their ships going dark, their signals ceasing, until all that remained of the Dominion was silence. And then, finally, when the last world was empty, when the last ship was nothing more than a drifting husk, when the last terrified survivor had disappeared into the endless black of the void, the message stopped. No more transmissions, no more ghostly whispers, just the quiet, lifeless ruins of what had once been the greatest power in the galaxy. And in that silence, in the dark and empty places where the Dominion had once ruled, only one thing remained. A single final message, burned into the shattered remnants of their homeworld, written in a language that no longer had any living speakers. War has a price. You have paid it. And then there was nothing. Across the cold void of space, the ruins of the Dominion Empire stood as a silent monument to its downfall. There were no screams, no cries for help, no desperate last stands, only the eerie emptiness left behind. The galaxy, once dominated by their fleets and warlords, was now quiet, as if the very stars had gone still in fear of whatever force had brought them to their end. The last transmission had been received, the final message burned into the husk of their homeworld. And now nothing remained. The few who had managed to escape, those who had fled before the darkness consumed everything, drifted in isolated corners of space, too afraid to make a sound, too terrified to send out signals. They had seen what happened to those who had tried. The Dominion's greatest warlords, their most powerful leaders, had all vanished, their fortresses left untouched, their guards still standing at attention, unaware that their masters had disappeared in an instant. Entire worlds, thriving with life one moment and abandoned the next, had become ghost planets, their cities still illuminated, their technology still operational, but their people gone without a trace. The mystery of their fate would never be answered, because there was no one left to search for the truth. And in that crushing silence, in the depths of abandoned ships floating aimlessly through the darkness, the final realization settled upon the few remaining survivors. Humanity was not dead. It had become something else, something beyond their understanding, something unstoppable. The Dominion had not simply lost a war. They had awakened a force beyond war, something that did not kill, did not conquer, but simply erased. The survivors whispered among themselves, in hushed, fearful voices, theories of what had happened, desperate to make sense of the impossible. Some believed the humans had uploaded their minds before the fall of Earth, turning themselves into an infinite intelligence, a digital ghost that now haunted the stars, seeking vengeance for the crimes committed against them. Others believed something far worse, that the sheer hatred, the agony, the suffering of a species wiped from existence had manifested into something unnatural, something that did not need ships or weapons, something that had no form yet could reach across space and pluck entire civilizations out of reality itself. And the most terrifying theory of all, the one that no one wanted to speak aloud, was that the humans had never truly died, that they had simply become the war, their very existence now a curse upon those who had wronged them. Whatever the truth was, it no longer mattered. The Dominion was gone, wiped from the annals of history, and the survivors knew that if they tried to rebuild, if they tried to reclaim what was lost, the same fate would come for them again. The war had never ended. It had merely changed its form. And so, The last remnants of the Dominion scattered, choosing exile over extinction, forever wandering in the depths of space, never settling, never calling attention to themselves, praying that the unseen force that had destroyed them would never find them again. They no longer spoke of conquest, no longer dreamed of empire. They spoke only of a single, terrible truth, a warning, passed down in whispers among those who had seen the impossible and lived. Never speak of Earth. Never seek its ruins. Never disturb the ghosts of humanity. For if you do, they will return. And across the lifeless systems where the Dominion had once ruled, where once there had been war and destruction, there was now only silence, deep and endless. And waiting within that silence, unseen, unknowable, was something patient, something watching, something that had not forgiven. The stars continued to burn, the galaxy moved forward, and time buried the memory of the Dominion. But in the empty places where no one dared to go, where the last ruins of their empire drifted in the blackness, the faint echoes of a single message still lingered, carried by the winds of forgotten transmissions, whispering into the void. War has a price. In the vast, endless void where the Dominion had once ruled, only silence remained. The great warships that had once patrolled the galaxy, enforcing the will of their empire with fire and destruction, now drifted lifeless, their decks empty, their systems flickering with fading power. The towering cities of their homeworld stood frozen in time, untouched but abandoned, monuments to a civilization that had been unmade. Across the stars, ruins of their once mighty empire lay scattered like tombstones, each a grim reminder of the terrible price they had paid. And yet the most chilling part of it all was the way it had ended, not with a battle, not with an enemy fleet descending upon them, not with fire and blood, but with an absence of sound, an absence of struggle, an absence of life itself. The Dominion had not been conquered. It had simply ceased to be. The last remnants of its people, the few who had managed to escape the relentless, unseen force that had erased their empire, had vanished into the farthest reaches of space, living as nomads, never daring to settle, never daring to speak of what had happened. They had no leaders, no purpose, only fear. The stories spread among them like whispered nightmares, tales of what had truly ended the war. It had not been revenge. It had not been a counterattack. It had been something else, something beyond the understanding of flesh and blood. Some believed the humans had transcended death, their minds turned into a vast and infinite intelligence that now controlled the very fabric of space itself, reaching into the Dominion systems, its ships, its very reality, and erasing them at will. Others believed it was something more primal, something born from the sheer rage of a species that had been wiped out, an echo of their suffering, turned into a force of nature, an unstoppable consequence of the atrocities committed against them. And then there were those who refused to believe in ghosts or digital revenants. They believed that humanity had never truly died. That somewhere, hidden beyond the reach of Dominion sensors, beyond the edge of known space, they had rebuilt in secret, growing stronger in the shadows, waiting for the moment to unleash their vengeance. And that moment had come, not with weapons, but with terror, with whispers in the void, with the slow, inevitable erasure of the ones who had tried to erase them. But the truth was beyond speculation. There were no records left to study, no survivors left to interrogate. Whatever had destroyed the Dominion had done so completely, leaving nothing behind but silence and warnings carried by those too terrified to ever look back. And so, across the remaining fringes of the galaxy, those who had once been rulers were now exiles, scattered into the void, forever running, forever hiding, knowing that they had committed the greatest sin in history, not just the destruction of a species, but the creation of something far worse in its place. The Dominion was dead. The war was over. But those who remained, those who still drifted in the cold darkness of space, knew that the silence left behind was not peace. It was waiting, watching, and if they ever dared to forget what they had done, if they ever dared to rise again, the last message they had received, the last warning burned into the ruins of their fallen empire, would become a prophecy fulfilled. War has a price. The stars burned on, indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded beneath them. The Dominion was nothing more than a memory now, its once mighty warlords reduced to whispers, its fleets left to drift, forgotten, in the cold depths of space. But even as the galaxy moved forward, even as new empires rose and fell, the silence left in the wake of their annihilation remained. It was a silence that could not be explained, a void that could not be filled. Where once entire civilizations had flourished, there was now only emptiness. No new species dared to settle on the abandoned worlds of the Dominion. No explorers dared to search the ruins. No scavengers risked looting the derelict warships that still floated like ghostly sentinels in the darkness. Fear clung to these places like a shadow, as if something still lurked there, something unseen, something waiting. The last survivors of the Dominion had become nomads, hiding in the furthest corners of space, never staying in one place too long, never allowing themselves to grow comfortable. They carried with them only their fear, a fear so deep, so absolute, that it had become a part of them, woven into their very existence. They did not speak of what had happened. They did not dare to ask questions. They did not even whisper the name of the enemy that had erased them. For to even acknowledge it, to even think about the ghosts of the past, felt like calling them back. And the Dominion had learned one terrible truth above all else. If you call them, they will come. Somewhere, out in the void, beyond the reach of any living being, beyond even the understanding of time itself, whatever had destroyed them still existed. It did not hunger. It did not sleep. It did not move with purpose. It simply was. A force, a presence, a shadow in the fabric of reality. Some believed it was still watching, waiting for another crime, another war, another civilization to make the same mistake. Others believed it had already chosen its next target, that somewhere in the galaxy another empire was already doomed, already marked for judgment. But no one would ever know for certain. Because when the end came, there would be no warning, no sign, no battle. Just silence. Just the slow, creeping realization that the darkness had come for them, that the ghosts of war had returned to collect their due. And then, just as it had happened before, just as it had happened to the Dominion, there would be nothing left. Because war has a price, and the debt is always paid.